58-year-old Jack Harmon's struggling farm sat on land central to the FBI's largest ongoing investigation, a revelation only discovered after his reluctant rescue of a stranded motorist during the worst blizzard in decades brought federal agents converging on their isolated rural community, exposed a sophisticated criminal network operating right under their noses for generations, and transformed a forgotten farming town on the brink of extinction into a national example of how ordinary acts of kindness can unravel decades of corruption and restore justice to places long abandoned by hope. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The February blizzard had turned Pinewood Valley into a treacherous maze of snowdrifts and ice. Jack Harmon, a third-generation farmer at 58, stood at his kitchen window watching the swirling snow with growing concern. The bank notice on his table, its red, final warning header impossible to ignore, confirmed what he'd feared for months. Without a miracle, the Harmon family would lose the farm that had been their home for over 7 decades. "Another foot by morning," Jack muttered, setting aside the foreclosure warning as his son Michael entered the kitchen. At 34, Michael had postponed his promising career in agricultural engineering to help save the family farm after Jack's heart attack last year. His wife and 2 children had remained in Minneapolis, a temporary arrangement that was stretching toward its 13th month. Even Michael's technical expertise couldn't overcome the combination of mounting debts, rising costs, and 3 consecutive seasons of poor harvests. "Dad, that storm warning just got upgraded," Michael said, holding up his phone with its cracked screen. Another small sacrifice in a long line of deferred maintenance and delayed replacements that marked their financial descent. "They're saying it might be the worst in 50 years. I need to check the generator and make sure we've got enough feed in the barn." Jack nodded, his weathered face showing both exhaustion and the stubborn determination that had kept him working. The land, long after many of his contemporaries had sold out to corporate farming operations. 6 generations of Harmons had weathered storms on this land, from the Dust Bowl that nearly broke his grandfather to the farm crisis of the 1980s that claimed 3 neighboring properties. None, however, had faced the perfect financial tempest that now threatened to sweep away their legacy. Global market pressures, climate-driven crop failures, and a medical debt from Jack's cardiac surgery that their insurance had only partially covered. The irony wasn't lost on him. They might survive nature's worst, only to lose everything to the bank anyway. The foreclosure date was March 15th, barely 6 weeks away. Their last hope rested on a long-shot application for an agricultural preservation grant that Michael had spent weeks researching and preparing, submitted just days before the deadline. "Last month, I'll check the emergency radio batteries," Jack said, moving toward the pantry where they kept their storm supplies. His left arm still ached in cold weather, a persistent reminder of the heart attack that had nearly taken his life, and had certainly jeopardized the farm's future. The doctors had warned him about excessive physical exertion, advice that was practically useless to a man who had never known any other way of life than the demanding physical work of running a family farm. As Michael zipped up his heavy coat and headed toward the door, a distant sound cut through the howling wind. 3 long blasts, then 3 short, the universal signal for help. "Someone's out on the county road," Jack said, already reaching for his own coat. "In this weather, they won't last an hour." Michael frowned, concern evident in his eyes. "Dad, your heart will be fine," Jack finished firmly, cutting off his son's objection. "Get the tractor ready. The snowmobile won't make it through drifts this deep." Michael knew better than to argue. The Harmon family code, passed down through generations, was simple. You never turned your back on someone in need, especially during the brutal northern winters that could claim a life in hours. Whatever financial troubles they faced, whatever health concerns lingered, some principles remained unshakable. 20 minutes later, father and son were inching their way down their long driveway on the farm's ancient John Deere tractor, its headlights barely penetrating the wall of swirling white. The temperature had dropped to 15 below zero, with the wind chill making it feel twice as cold. Jack was grateful for the tractor's cab, a luxury his grandfather never had, though its heater worked sporadically at best. "When this is over," Michael shouted over the engine's roar, trying to lighten the mood, "remind me again why we didn't move to Arizona when Mom suggested it 20 years ago." Jack managed a small smile at the familiar family joke. Clara, his late wife, had indeed suggested warmer climates every winter without fail, though they both knew she loved the farm too much to ever seriously consider leaving. She had been gone 5 years now, cancer taking her quickly and cruelly, but her presence still filled the farmhouse. Sometimes Jack found himself automatically setting a place for her at dinner or turning to share a thought, only to find empty space where she should have been. "There," Michael pointed toward a faint red glow about 50 yards off the county road. "Hazard lights, I think." They found a black SUV with government plates buried up to its windows in a snowdrift, its wheels spinning uselessly as the driver attempted to rock it free. The vehicle was clearly out of place in rural Pinewood Valley, too new, too expensive, and entirely unsuited for the brutal winter conditions. Jack approached the driver's side, where a woman in a thin business suit was clearly suffering from the early stages of hypothermia despite the vehicle's running heater. "Mom, you need to come with us right now," Jack said after she rolled down her window. "This storm's just getting started, and you're in serious trouble out here." The woman hesitated, glancing at a laptop and briefcase on the passenger seat. She had the polished appearance of someone from the city, dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, sharp features, and an alertness in her eyes that contrasted with her obvious physical distress from the cold. "I can't leave my vehicle," she replied, her voice steady despite her shivering. "I have work materials, sensitive documents." "Your choice is simple," Jack replied with the directness of someone who had survived 6 decades of rural hardships. "Bring what you can carry and come with us, or stay with your documents and die beside them. We're about 10 minutes from losing the trail back to our farm." Something in Jack's tone must have conveyed the severity of the situation. The woman nodded, quickly gathering her laptop, briefcase, and a small duffel bag. He noticed she wore a thin gold chain around her neck that disappeared beneath her collar, and her right hand kept returning to check it was still there. "I'm Alexandra Reeves," she said as Jack helped her climb onto the tractor. "Thank you for coming out in this. My GPS routed me through here as a shortcut to Interstate 90. I should have checked the weather more carefully." "Jack Harmon," he replied, "and my son Michael. Our farm's about a mile back. You're lucky we heard your horn. Cell service is spotty here, even in good weather." As they slowly made their way back to the farmhouse, Jack couldn't help but wonder what would bring a woman like Alexandra Reeves to Pinewood Valley in February. The town had been slowly dying for decades, losing population with each passing year as young people sought opportunities elsewhere, and the remaining farmers struggled to keep their operations viable. The last outsider to willingly visit had been a bank assessor 8 months ago, whose report had no doubt contributed to the foreclosure notice now sitting on Jack's kitchen table. "You're a long way from anywhere that would need—" Jack gestured to her city clothes and briefcase. "Whatever it is you do." Alexandra's expression remained carefully neutral. "I'm a financial investigator. Sometimes my work takes me to unexpected places." Michael shot his father a questioning look from the driver's seat, but Jack just shrugged slightly. Everyone was entitled to their privacy, though something about the woman's careful phrasing suggested there was more to her story than a wrong turn in bad weather. The farmhouse came into view. a two-story white clapboard structure that had been expanded by each generation of Harmons since it was first built in 1951. Warm light spilled from the windows and smoke curled from the chimney where Jack had started a fire in the old wood stove earlier that morning, a practical measure to reduce their propane heating costs as much as a comfort during the storm. "It's not much," Jack said as they approached, "but it's warm, and you're welcome to stay until the road's clear." Alexandra nodded gratefully, though Jack noticed her eyes scanning the property with unusual attentiveness, taking in the barn, the equipment shed, and the fields beyond that disappeared into the swirling snow. It was almost a professional assessment rather than casual observation. Once inside, Michael stoked the fire while Jack found dry clothes for their unexpected guest, an old pair of Clara's jeans and a flannel shirt that had shrunk in the wash. Alexandra excused herself to change, taking her briefcase with her to the bathroom, but leaving her duffel bag and laptop in the kitchen. "Financial investigator, huh?" Michael said quietly once she was out of earshot. "Government plates on her car. You think this has something to do with the farm? The bank sending someone to look things over before the foreclosure?" Jack shook his head. "Those weren't bank government plates. Besides, no financial investigator I know would drive out here in a blizzard with 6 weeks still to go. Something else brought her to Pinewood Valley." When Alexandra returned, color had begun to return to her face, though she still clutched a steaming mug of coffee in both hands to warm them. Jack noticed she had kept her own boots rather than borrowing Clara's old ones he'd left out, and she'd repositioned the gold chain so it was now visible, a small pendant with what appeared to be a badge of some kind, though he couldn't make out the details from across the room. "I can't thank you enough," she said, settling into a chair at the kitchen table. "I seriously misjudged the situation out there." "Happens to city folks all the time," Jack replied without judgment. "Weather up here doesn't give second chances. You said you were trying to reach I-90. That's still a good 40 miles south, and this storm's supposed to last through tomorrow at least." Alexandra sipped her coffee, then seemed to make a decision. "Actually, Pinewood Valley was my destination. The highway was just where I was planning to find a hotel afterward." She hesitated, studying Jack's face carefully. "How long has your family owned this land, Mr. Harmon?" The question caught Jack off guard. "Going on 7 decades now. My grandfather bought the original 80 acres after World War II, added another 40 in 63. We picked up the north section from the Petersons when they retired in 85. He gestured vaguely toward the window, though nothing was visible through the snow. "Why do you ask?" Instead of answering directly, Alexandra reached for her briefcase, unlocked it with a combination, and removed a folder. "I should be clear about something. I'm not exactly a financial investigator, at least not the kind that works with banks." She opened the folder and removed an identification card, sliding it across the table to Jack. The FBI shield was unmistakable, as was her title, Special Agent, Financial Crimes Division. "I'm investigating a money laundering network that we believe has been operating in this region for several decades," she continued, as Jack stared at the identification. "Your farm happens to be located on a piece of property that's come up repeatedly in our investigation." Michael had joined them at the table, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm. "Our farm? That's impossible. We're barely keeping the lights on. If there was money being laundered here, we'd be the last to know but the first to benefit." Agent Reeves, her real name she confirmed, nodded understanding. "We don't believe your family is involved. In fact, based on our preliminary investigation, the Harmons appear to be the only property owners in this particular area who aren't connected to the network we're tracking." Jack felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm raging outside. "Connected how? And who exactly are we talking about?" "I can't share specifics of an ongoing investigation," Alexandra replied, but I can tell you that several properties surrounding yours have changed hands multiple times over the past 30 years, always between a select group of corporate entities that our forensic accountants have flagged as suspicious. The sale prices and timing patterns suggest artificial transactions designed to move money while appearing legitimate. She pulled out a map from her folder, spreading it on the table. Red circles marked various properties surrounding the Harmon farm, which sat in the center unmarked. Your property is unique, she continued. It's remained in the same family despite substantial offers that frankly were well above market value. According to our records, your father turned down an offer in 1978 that was nearly triple what comparable land was selling for at the time. Jack remembered that offer. His father had dismissed it without a second thought, telling a young Jack that Harmon land stays Harmon land. It had seemed like stubborn pride at the time, though Jack had later adopted the same position when similar offers came in during the difficult years after Clara's death. We always figured they wanted it. For development, Jack said slowly, though nothing ever came of the surrounding properties they did buy. Some changed hands 3 or 4 times, but just sat empty or were leased back to local farmers. Alexandra's expression confirmed she had noted the same pattern. Exactly. Land that changes ownership but not use is classic money laundering, especially when the ownership chains create circular patterns that eventually return to entities connected to the original seller. Michael leaned forward, engineer's mind working through the implications. But why here? Pinewood Valley is literally the middle of nowhere. If you wanted to launder money, wouldn't you use urban real estate where values fluctuate more dramatically? That's precisely why rural areas are attractive, Alexandra explained. Less scrutiny, fewer comparable sales to establish market baselines, and transactions that don't attract attention from urban-focused financial crime units. She turned to Jack. Your farm occupies what our analysis indicates is a critical geographical position. It effectively divides the properties we've identified, making it harder for the network to operate without exposure. The implications were starting to sink in for Jack. Are you saying someone wants our land, not for its agricultural value, but because it's in the way of whatever this is? Alexandra nodded grimly. That foreclosure notice isn't a coincidence, Mr. Harmon. The bank holding your mortgage was purchased 6 months ago by a holding company we've been tracking. The timing suggests they may be accelerating actions against properties that interfere with their operations. Jack felt anger rising through his initial shock. Someone had deliberately targeted their farm, leveraging his medical debt and the recent poor harvests to force a foreclosure that had nothing to do with the land's actual value. He thought of the generations of Harmons who had worked this soil, of Clara, who had loved the view from the kitchen window in every season, of the legacy he had hoped to preserve despite the mounting odds against them. What exactly are you investigating? He asked, his voice low and controlled. What would make our land worth all this trouble? Alexandra hesitated, clearly weighing how much she could reveal. The howling wind rattled the farmhouse windows, a reminder of the isolation that currently enclosed them. The storm had effectively cut off Pinewood Valley from the outside world, including whatever support systems the FBI agent might normally rely on. I'm not supposed to disclose this, she finally said, but given the circumstances, you deserve to know. She pulled another document from her folder, a geological survey map with various markings that meant nothing to Jack. Are you familiar with rare earth elements, Mr. Harmon? Michael answered before his father could. Minerals used in electronics, renewable energy components, defense systems. China controls most of the world's supply. There's been a push to develop domestic sources. Alexandra nodded. This region sits on one of the largest untapped deposits in North America. It's not just valuable, it's strategically critical. The network we're tracking isn't just laundering money. They're quietly assembling land holdings over the deposit before its existence becomes public knowledge. Jack stared at the map, suddenly, seeing his struggling farm in an entirely new light. And our property. Preliminary surveys suggest your land contains the most accessible portion of the deposit. Mining anywhere else would be exponentially more expensive without access through your property. The three sat in silence as the implications settled over the kitchen. The old farmhouse creaked under the assault of the winter storm, a sound that had always represented security to Jack. They were inside, protected from the elements. Now he wondered what other threats had been surrounding them, invisible but no less dangerous than the blizzard outside. "So what happens now?" Michael finally asked. "Foreclosure is 6 weeks away. Even if what you're saying is true, I don't see how it helps our situation." Alexandra closed her folder deliberately. "That depends on your willingness to work with us. I came here to propose a cooperation arrangement, though not quite under these circumstances." She gestured toward the window and the blizzard beyond. "The FBI can delay your foreclosure through various legal mechanisms while our investigation continues. In exchange, we'd need access to your property and your assistance with monitoring activities in the area." Jack considered the proposal, years of farmers' caution warring with their desperate financial situation. "And after your investigation, what happens to our farm then?" "I can't make guarantees," Alexandra admitted, "but documentation of deliberate, predatory actions against your mortgage could provide grounds for legal remedy. At minimum, it would give you leverage for refinancing options that weren't previously available." It wasn't a perfect solution, but it offered something Jack had almost given up on: time. Time for the grant application to be processed. Time for Michael to implement some of his agricultural engineering innovations. Time to find a way forward that didn't involve losing everything his family had built. "We'd need something in writing," Michael said, practical as always. "Some kind of protection in case this investigation gets shut down or reassigned." Alexandra nodded. "I have authorization documents in my briefcase. They would need to be properly filed once the storm clears, but they're valid once signed." As she reached for her briefcase, a sudden sound outside caught their attention. The distinct rumble of a heavy engine, barely audible through the storm, but unmistakably approaching. The farm. Jack moved to the window, straining to see through the swirling snow. "We're not expecting anyone, and nobody would be out driving in this unless it was an emergency." He turned to Alexandra, whose expression had shifted to alert concern. "Any colleagues of yours I should know about?" She shook her head slowly, reaching into her jacket and removing a small service pistol that Jack hadn't realized she was carrying. "No. My presence here isn't known to local authorities, and backup isn't scheduled to establish contact until after the storm." The engine sound grew louder, then cut off abruptly. Through a momentary clearing in the snow, Jack glimpsed 2 dark SUVs, similar to Alexandra's, but with no visible markings, parked at the far end of his driveway. "Get away from the windows," Alexandra instructed, her voice now carrying the unmistakable authority of her training. "Is there a basement or storm shelter?" "Root cellar," Jack replied, already moving toward the pantry. "Access through the kitchen." He had installed a reinforced door after a tornado scare 10 years ago, one of the few home improvements he'd managed before their financial situation deteriorated. As Michael quickly gathered flashlights and emergency supplies, Jack saw Alexandra send a rapid text message before powering down her phone completely and removing its battery. Her actions confirmed what he already suspected. Whoever had followed her to the farm wasn't part of her official investigation. "How did they find you in this storm?" Michael asked, voicing the question Jack was thinking. "They must have been tracking me before I lost control of my vehicle," Alexandra replied grimly, "which means they know exactly why I'm here." She turned to Jack, her expression deadly serious. "Mr. Harmon, I believe the people approaching your home are connected to the network I'm investigating. They're not law enforcement, and they won't have your best interests in mind. Until this storm clears and I can contact my team, we should assume we're on our own." As if to punctuate her warning, a heavy knock sounded at the front door. Two, confident to be another stranded traveler seeking help, too forceful to be easily ignored. Jack Harmon looked at the FBI agent and his son, processing how completely their situation had transformed in the span of an hour. The foreclosure notice seemed almost trivial now, compared to the immediate threat outside. As Jack moved toward the root cellar door, he realized that his simple act of rescue during the worst blizzard in decades had unexpectedly connected him to something far larger and more dangerous than he could have imagined. The stranger he'd pulled from certain death carried information that had apparently made her a target, and now his family farm, already hanging by a financial thread, had become the isolated battleground for what appeared to be a confrontation. With far-reaching implications, all Jack had wanted was to save his family's legacy for another generation. Now he found himself trying to save something far more immediate, their lives and the life of an FBI agent who had brought both revelation and danger to his door on the wings of the winter storm. The knocking came again, louder this time, as Jack quietly secured the root cellar door behind them. The Harmon farm had kept its secrets for 3 generations. Now it would need to keep 3 people alive until the storm retreated and the truth could finally emerge from the blizzard's concealing embrace. The root cellar beneath the Harmon farmhouse had been dug by Jack's grandfather in 1953, expanded by his father during the Cold War tension of the 1960s, and reinforced by Jack himself after the tornado that had nearly taken out the barn in 2012. What had begun as a practical storage space for preserves and root vegetables had evolved into a genuine emergency shelter, with reinforced concrete walls, independent ventilation, and enough space to accommodate a small family for several days if necessary. Jack had never expected to use it for anything more serious than tornado warnings and the occasional extreme blizzard. Now, as he secured the heavy door behind them and activated the battery-powered lanterns mounted on the walls, the shelter took on a completely different significance. "They won't find this entrance easily," he explained in a low voice, gesturing to the false panel in the pantry floor they had come through. "It looks like regular kitchen flooring unless you know what to look for." Alexandra nodded, visibly impressed by the setup as she took in the shelves of canned goods, the emergency water containers, and the small propane heater. Smart precautions for a farm this isolated. "Rural living teaches you to be self-sufficient," Michael replied, checking the battery level on their emergency radio. "Dad insisted on upgrading this place after Mom got sick. Said if another medical emergency happened in bad weather, we'd need somewhere comfortable to wait for help." Jack felt a familiar pang at the mention of Clara. His late wife had always teased him about his doomsday bunker, as she called it, though she'd added her own touches. The colorful quilts now folded on the small cots, the collection of books. On the shelf, the hand-drawn family pictures in simple frames that made the utilitarian space feel less institutional. "How long can we stay down here without going back up?" Alexandra asked, her training evident in the practical question. 3 days comfortably, maybe 5 if we're careful with water," Jack answered. "The ventilation system runs on its own solar battery that charges during good weather. There's a chemical toilet behind that partition." He gestured to a curtained-off area in the corner. "It's not the Ritz, but it'll keep us alive." Above them, muffled by the insulated ceiling, they could hear heavy footsteps moving through the farmhouse. Jack strained to listen, counting at least 3 distinct patterns, 3 intruders searching his home. The knowledge that strangers were violating the space where generations of his family had lived sent a surge of anger through him, temporarily overwhelming even his concern about their safety. Alexandra had positioned herself near the entrance, her service weapon ready but not raised. Her posture suggested professional alertness rather than panic, which Jack found oddly reassuring despite the gravity of their situation. "What exactly have I gotten my family into?" Jack asked quietly as the footsteps continued overhead. "Who are these people?" Alexandra considered her answer carefully. "Based on patterns we've observed, they're likely private security contractors, working for the network I mentioned, professional, well-funded, and operating with enough corporate cover to maintain plausible deniability if caught. Mercenaries," Michael translated bluntly. "In rural Minnesota, looking for what exactly? You. Me, and more importantly, the evidence I've gathered." Alexandra patted her briefcase. "I have documentation linking several seemingly unrelated corporations to a coordinated effort to acquire land in this region. Financial records showing artificial transactions designed to launder money while assembling property holdings over the rare earth deposit. And they followed you here through a blizzard to retrieve that evidence," Jack observed. "Must be even more damning than you've let on." Alexandra nodded grimly. "What I haven't mentioned is that we've identified connections between this network and several state officials who would be responsible for regulating any mining operations. Officials who have received substantial consulting fees through shell companies we've traced back to the same network." Jack absorbed this information, understanding flowing through him like ice water. "So it's not just about quietly buying up land before the deposit becomes public knowledge. It's about controlling the regulatory process once mining begins." "Exactly. Ensuring minimal environmental oversight, favorable tax treatment, expedited permits, the whole package. The potential profits from unrestricted access to a strategic mineral deposit of this size are—" She paused, searching for an adequate description. "Nation-changing," Michael finished for her. "Both economically and in terms of global industrial positioning." The footsteps overhead grew louder, directly above them now as the intruders entered the kitchen. Jack held his breath, silently willing the false floor to remain undetected. He had designed the access point to blend seamlessly with the original hardwood, but a determined search might still reveal its existence. A heavy thud shook dust from the ceiling. Someone was moving the refrigerator, checking behind it. More thuds followed as furniture was shifted and floorboards tested. Jack exchanged a worried glance with Michael. The searchers were being thorough, more so than ordinary burglars would be. "Sir," a muffled voice carried faintly through the ceiling. "No sign of them in the house. Tracks show they may have gone to the barn before we arrived." Another voice, carrying more authority. "Check it. Johnson, keep searching here. They haven't left the property. Not in this weather. The woman is here somewhere, and she has the Langford documents." Alexandra's expression tightened at the mention of Langford documents. Whatever that referred to, it clearly held significance beyond what she had already shared. Jack made a mental note to ask about it if they survived the current crisis. The footsteps receded, some toward the front door, others continuing to move methodically through the house. For several tense minutes, the three sat in silence, listening to the occasional thud or creak from above. "Even if they don't find us, we can't stay hidden forever," Michael finally whispered. "The storm's supposed to last at least until tomorrow evening. Once it clears, your people will come looking, right?" He directed the question to Alexandra. She checked her watch, frowning slightly. "I was scheduled to check in at 1800 hours. When I miss that window, protocols will activate, but the weather will delay any response. We should plan on being isolated at least 36 hours, possibly longer." Jack processed this information with the practical mindset that had helped him weather so many challenges on the farm. So we need to survive until help arrives, which means remaining undetected. He gestured to their surroundings. This shelter connects to a drainage tunnel that leads to the old well house about 100 yards from the main building. It was designed as an emergency exit in case of fire. That could be useful, Alexandra acknowledged. Though in this weather, leaving the shelter would present its own risks. It's an option of last resort, Jack agreed. For now, our best bet is to stay put and... He was interrupted by a sharp, splintering crack from above, followed by a triumphant shout. "Sir! I found something!" The three froze, eyes fixed on the ceiling. The false floor had been discovered. "Move!" Alexandra hissed, already in motion toward the small tunnel Jack had indicated. "They'll be through in minutes." Jack grabbed an emergency backpack he kept prepared, containing first aid supplies, additional flashlights, energy bars, and a small toolkit, while Michael quickly filled water bottles from their stored supply. Alexandra gathered her briefcase and laptop, checking that her weapon was secure before leading the way into the narrow passage. The tunnel was only about 4 feet high, requiring them to move in a crouch position that Jack's back immediately protested against. It had been dug decades ago and reinforced with timber supports that now creaked ominously as they passed. The earthen floor was damp but not flooded, a small mercy given the circumstances. Behind them, they heard the cellar crash open, followed by shouts as the intruders discovered the recently vacated shelter. Jack winced at the sound of items being thrown and glass breaking, more violation of his family's space, more destruction of what little they had left. "How far?" Alexandra whispered as they continued their awkward progress through the narrow space. "About 60 yards, Jack replied, his voice strained both from exertion and emotion. "The well house is stone, built in the 1940s. We modernized the water system years ago, but kept the structure for storage." They pushed forward, the sound of pursuit growing fainter behind them. The tunnel sloped gradually upward as they approached. Its exit, decades of careful engineering ensuring that water would drain away from rather than into the shelter. Jack silently thanked his father and grandfather for their foresight, even as he worried about what would await them at the other. And after what seemed an eternity of uncomfortable crawling, they reached a wooden ladder leading up to a trapdoor. Jack went first, forcing his aging body up the rungs before carefully pushing against the heavy door above. It opened with a protesting groan, revealing the interior of the small stone structure he had described. The well house was a single room, perhaps 10 feet square, with the abandoned well shaft in its center, now securely capped and sealed. Old farm implements hung on the walls, and bags of fertilizer were stacked in one corner. A small window, originally designed to allow access to the well's hand pump, provided their only view of the outside world, a view currently limited to swirling white as the blizzard continued its assault. Michael emerged next, helping Alexandra up the final rungs before closing the trapdoor and securing it with a rusted but still functional bolt. Jack had already moved to the window, wiping condensation from the glass to peer toward the main farmhouse. Through the veil of snow, he could make out lights moving inside, flashlights carried by the intruders as they continued their search. "They'll check the outbuildings next," he said grimly. "This won't stay secure for long." Alexandra was already scanning the small space, evaluating their options. "Does anyone else know about the tunnel? Would they expect you to come here specifically?" Jack shook his head. "Just family knowledge, passed down. It's not on any property. Plans or blueprints. Then we have a small advantage," she replied. "They know we've escaped the cellar, but they'll have to search all possible locations. That buys us some time." Michael had been examining the farm tools hanging on the walls. He selected a solid iron crowbar and a heavy wrench, offering the latter to his father. Not much against guns, but better than nothing. Jack accepted the makeshift weapon, though he desperately hoped it wouldn't come to direct confrontation. In his younger days, he might have felt more confident about defending his property physically. Now, with a heart condition and 60 years of hard labor stored in his aching joints, he harbored no illusions about his chances against trained operatives. "What's in the Langford documents?" he asked Alexandra, recalling the name he'd overheard. They seemed particularly concerned about those. Alexandra hesitated before apparently deciding that full disclosure was their best option now. Edward Langford was a geologist working for the Minnesota Geological Survey in 2008. He conducted the initial survey that identified the rare earth deposit, but died in what was ruled an accident before his findings could be officially published. "Accident?" Michael raised an eyebrow. "Single vehicle crash on an icy road. Not uncommon in this region, especially in winter." Alexandra's tone suggested she didn't necessarily accept the official ruling. What makes it interesting is that all copies of his survey data disappeared from official records. His personal notes and backup files also vanished during the executor's processing of his estate. But not all copies, Jack guessed, eyeing her briefcase. Langford sent encrypted files to a colleague at the University of Michigan the day before his death. That colleague recently approached the FBI after recognizing similarities between Langford's survey area and news reports about unusual property transactions in the region. The significance wasn't lost on Jack. "So you have the only remaining evidence of both the mineral deposit and, I'm guessing, its true extent and value." Alexandra nodded. The official geological records for this region were mysteriously updated in 2009 to show minimal rare earth concentrations, enough to acknowledge their presence, but categorize them as not commercially viable. Langford's actual findings tell a very different story. "And our farm sits on what exactly?" Michael asked, the engineer in him seeking precise information. "Based on Langford's data, your property contains not just the most accessible portion of the deposit, but also what he called exceptional concentration zones of neodymium and dysprosium, two of the most valuable rare earth elements for advanced technology applications." Jack processed this information, pieces falling into place in his mind. The repeated offers for their land over the years, always substantially above market value. The pressure that increased after his heart attack created financial vulnerability. The surprisingly rapid foreclosure process initiated by a bank that had previously been accommodating. "So we're not just in their way," he said slowly. "Our land is the primary target." "Precisely," Alexandra confirmed. "The surrounding properties they've acquired are valuable but secondary. Accessing the deposit through those lands alone would increase extraction costs significantly. Your farm is the key to the entire operation." A sudden banging at the farmhouse's back door, visible through the wellhouse window, interrupted their conversation. The intruders had begun their search of the outbuildings, starting with the barn. The wellhouse would likely be checked soon after. "We need a plan," Michael said, stating the obvious. "This building won't hide us for long, and we can't outrun them in the blizzard." Jack stared out at the swirling snow, his mind racing through options. The storm that had initially seemed their greatest threat now offered a strange form of protection. The intruders were as limited by the weather as they were, and as unfamiliar with the property's layout. "The old grain silo," he said finally. "Northeast corner of the property, about 400 yards from here. It hasn't been used in years. We switched to grain bags in the 90s, but the structure is solid. More importantly, it has an underground maintenance access that most people wouldn't know about." Alexandra considered this. 400 yards in whiteout conditions is risky. We could become disoriented and freeze before finding it. "Not if we follow the fence line," Jack replied. I replaced the posts myself 3 summers ago. They're set at 10-yard intervals, tall enough to stay visible even in deep snow. If we go from post to post, we can navigate to the silo without losing our way. It wasn't an ideal plan, but as the sound of doors being kicked in grew closer, it seemed their only viable option. They quickly prepared for the brutal conditions outside, Jack and Michael adding extra layers from the work clothes. They kept in the wellhouse, Alexandra borrowing a heavy canvas coat that had belonged to Jack's father. Stay close, move quickly but carefully, and don't lose sight of the person ahead of you, Jack instructed as he prepared to open the door. If we get separated, head for any building you can find and hunker down. Survival first, everything else. Second, the moment Jack cracked the wellhouse door, the full fury of the blizzard assaulted them. Wind-driven snow stung exposed skin like tiny needles, and the temperature, well below 0 before wind chill, immediately penetrated their layers. Visibility extended perhaps 15 feet in the best moments, shrinking to arm's length when stronger gusts swept across the open field. Jack led the way, one gloved hand extended to find the first fence post. Each step required deliberate effort, boots breaking through snow that had drifted thigh-deep in places. Behind him, Michael helped Alexandra navigate the difficult terrain, her city boots and borrowed clothing less suited to the harsh conditions than their farm gear. The journey that would take 5 minutes on a clear day stretched into an eternity of frigid struggle. Jack counted posts as they progressed, using the numbers to estimate their position on the property. His chest tightened with each labored breath, the cold air aggravating his cardiac condition. He pushed the discomfort aside, focusing only on reaching the next post, then the next. 15 posts in, nearly halfway to their destination, a shout carried through the storm, distant but distinct. One of the intruders had spotted movement from the farmhouse window. Their escape had been discovered. "Move faster," Jack urged, abandoning caution for speed. "They'll follow our tracks." They pushed forward with renewed urgency, the fence posts now their lifeline in more ways than one. 20 posts. 25. Jack's lungs burned with each breath, and his left arm had begun to ache with the familiar warning sign he'd experienced before his heart attack. He ignored it, drawing on reserves of determination that had seen him through countless farm crises over the decades. After 38 fence posts, the last landmark before they would need to turn toward the silo, Jack paused, straining to see through the swirling white. For a moment, nothing was visible beyond their small group. Then, as the wind briefly slackened, a dark, cylindrical shape emerged from the whiteness perhaps 40 yards ahead. "There," he pointed, relief evident in his voice despite his exhaustion. "The silo." They abandoned the fence line, striking out across the final stretch of open ground toward the looming structure. The snow here had drifted even deeper, nearly waist-high in places, making each step an exhausting ordeal. Jack felt Michael's supporting hand on his elbow, his son sensing his fatigue without needing to be told. The silo had been built in the early 1960s, a concrete cylinder 60 feet tall and 30 feet in diameter. Once the pride of Harmon Farm, it had stood empty for nearly 20 years as changing agricultural practices and financial constraints forced adaptation. Jack had considered demolishing it more than once, but could never justify the expense when simple neglect didn't harm anyone. Now, as they reached its curved wall, the abandoned structure represented their best hope for survival. Jack moved slowly around its perimeter, searching for the access hatch that had once allowed maintenance of the unloading equipment. Snow had drifted against the silo's base, concealing many of its features, and his numbed fingers struggled to distinguish concrete from metal as he probed through the white blanket. "Here!" he finally called, his voice barely audible over the wind. He brushed away snow to reveal a rusted metal hatch set into the silo's foundation at ground level. It hadn't been opened in years, perhaps decades, and resisted his initial attempt to turn the handle. Michael stepped forward with the crowbar he'd carried from the wellhouse, inserting it through the handle's loop and applying leverage. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then, with a screech of protesting metal, the mechanism turned and the hatch swung open. The space beyond was pitch black, smelling of old grain dust and damp concrete. Alexandra activated the flashlight on her phone, revealing a small maintenance chamber with a ladder leading up into the silo's main volume. "Inside, quickly," Jack urged, hearing another distant shout carried on the wind. Their pursuers were following their trail, though the rapidly falling snow was thankfully obscuring their tracks almost as quickly as they were made. One by one, they climbed through the hatch. Michael, entering last, pulled it closed behind them, shutting out the howling wind and driving snow. The sudden silence was almost as disorienting as the darkness, broken only by their labored breathing and the faint beam of Alexandra's phone light. "There should be a maintenance panel inside that connects to the electrical system," Jack said, between deep breaths, trying to slow his racing heart. "Not sure if it still works, but worth checking." Michael found the metal box on the wall near the ladder, opening it to reveal ancient switches and a bundle of wires that had been partially gnawed by rodents over the years of abandonment. He examined it carefully, his engineering background evident in his methodical approach. "The wiring's mostly intact," he reported. "If there's still power to the silo, we might get some lights." The service to outbuildings was separate from the house, Jack recalled. On its own breaker system. Unless they've found the main junction box, it should still be active. Michael flipped a large switch at the bottom of the panel, and to their collective surprise and relief, dim lights flickered to life along the curved wall of the maintenance chamber. The illumination was weak and uneven, several bulbs having failed over the years, but infinitely better than darkness. With light, they could properly assess their surroundings. The chamber was perhaps 15 feet in diameter, following the curve of the silo's outer wall, with the concrete floor swept clean by years of disuse. Metal shelving units bolted to the walls still held tools and repair parts for equipment, long since removed or replaced. A ladder mounted to the wall led upward through a hatch into the main silo chamber, while a second, smaller access point appeared to connect to a sub-level below. "The ventilation system for the grain-drying fans is under the floor," Jack explained, indicating the lower access. "There's a crawl space that runs the full diameter of the silo, about 4 feet high. Not comfortable, but well hidden if we need it." Alexandra had been examining the space with the tactical assessment of her training. "This position is defensible in the short term, but we're effectively cornered. If they find us, there's no secondary exit. They have to find us first," Michael pointed out. "In this weather, tracking us all the way from the wellhouse won't be easy, especially if they're not familiar with the property layout." Jack wasn't as optimistic. "They seemed well prepared and determined. I wouldn't underestimate—" He was interrupted by a sharp pain lancing through his chest, more intense than the earlier warning signs. His left arm suddenly felt leaden, and dark spots swam across his vision. Heart attack symptoms, unmistakable this time. He staggered, reaching for support against the curved wall. "Dad!" Michael was instantly at his side, helping him to sit on the concrete floor. "What's wrong?" Jack couldn't immediately answer, focusing on breathing through the pain as his doctor had taught him after the previous attack. Alexandra knelt beside him, her FBI training evidently including emergency medical response. "Heart issue?" she asked, noting his hand pressed against his chest and his ashen complexion. Jack nodded, managing to force words out between careful breaths. "Had an attack last year. Feels similar. Need medication." Michael's expression shifted from concern to alarm. "Your pills are in the house, in the kitchen cabinet." The implications were clear to all of them. Jack's heart medication was in the farmhouse, now occupied by armed intruders. Without it, a heart attack that might be manageable could become life-threatening, especially with proper medical care hours away at best. Alexandra made a quick decision. We need to recover his medication. The storm provides cover for movement, and they'll be focused on following our tracks from the wellhouse. You can't go back to the house, Jack protested, the pain making his voice tight but his mind still clear. Too dangerous. I didn't survive FBI training to watch a civilian die because I was afraid of a few hired guns, Alexandra replied with quiet determination. Michael, what does the medication look like, and exactly where is it kept? As Michael described the prescription bottle and its location, Jack watched the FBI agent transform before his eyes. The professional but somewhat reserved woman they had rescued from the blizzard was gone, replaced by someone whose focused intensity reminded him of Clara during the worst crises they had weathered together on the farm. That same clear-eyed determination that acknowledged danger without being paralyzed by it. Use this sub-level if anyone comes, Alexandra instructed, checking her weapon and zipping her borrowed coat securely. Stay quiet, stay hidden. I'll be back as quickly as possible. Before either man could offer further protest, she had climbed back through the hatch into the blizzard, pulling it closed behind her. The last glimpse Jack had of her was a figure disappearing into swirling white, moving with purpose toward the distant farmhouse, now occupied by people who would likely kill her if discovered. Left alone in the dim light of the maintenance chamber, father and son sat in worried silence. Jack focused on controlling his breathing, using techniques his cardiac rehabilitation nurse had taught him to manage episodes without medication. The pain remained, a vice-like pressure across his chest, but hadn't intensified further. A small mercy. She shouldn't have gone, Michael said after several minutes. We could have waited out the storm, found another solution. Jack shook his head slightly. She made a tactical decision. The storm covers her approach, and they're searching in the wrong direction. He managed a weak smile. Besides, I've learned not to argue with strong-willed women. Your mother taught me that lesson repeatedly. The mention of Clara brought a brief smile to Michael's worried face. She would have gone for the medication herself, storm or no storm, and told me off for being careless enough to leave it behind. Jack agreed, the shared memory providing momentary comfort amid their dire circumstances. The comfort was short-lived. A metallic clang against the silo's exterior wall cut through their conversation. Something or someone had struck the structure. Both men froze, eyes fixed on the hatch through which Alexandra had departed minutes earlier. Another clang followed, by muffled voices. The intruders had found the silo more quickly than anticipated, perhaps alerted by the lights now glowing faintly through its few small windows. Jack gestured toward the lower access hatch, and Michael immediately moved to open it, revealing a dark crawl space below the main floor. With his son's help, Jack lowered himself into the cramped area beneath the silo. The space smelled of damp, earth and old grain, decades of dust coating every surface. Michael followed, pulling the access cover closed above them, just as the exterior hatch could be heard scraping open. Heavy footsteps entered the maintenance chamber, accompanied by voices, now clearly audible. Structure shows recent activity. Lights on, footprints fresh. Check the entire interior. They could be hiding anywhere in here. Sir, we've got a blood pressure medication bottle here. Prescription for Jack Harmon. Jack closed his eyes briefly, recognizing that they had discovered his spare medication. The emergency backup he kept in the farm's first aid kit, forgotten until this moment. The bottle was nearly empty, containing only 2 or 3 pills, but its presence confirmed the intruders' suspicions that their quarry had sought shelter in the silo. Harmon's the property owner, another voice stated. Heart condition, according to our brief. They're definitely here, and one of them needs medical attention. The footsteps moved across the floor above them, methodical in their search pattern. Metal scraped against metal, as storage cabinets were opened and equipment moved. Jack and Michael remained motionless in their hiding place, scarcely daring to breathe as dust motes swirled around them in the faint light filtering through cracks in the access cover. "What about the FBI agent?" one voice asked. "Primary objective is recovering the Langford documents," came the reply, carrying the tone of authority. "The woman is secondary, though the client would prefer she doesn't report back to her superiors. As for the civilians, no witnesses," was the instruction. The clinical discussion of their potential murder sent a chill through Jack that had nothing to do with the cold he had endured in the blizzard. These weren't simply security personnel. They were experienced operators comfortable with elimination of witnesses. His decision to help a stranded motorist had placed his family in the crosshairs of people who killed without apparent hesitation or remorse. Above them, the search continued. Footsteps approached the very spot where they were hiding, pausing. Directly overhead, Jack could see the faint impression of weight shifting the access cover slightly, dust drifting down as someone stood unwittingly atop their hiding place. "Check the upper levels," the authoritative voice commanded. "I want this structure secured before we bring in the thermal equipment. This weather interferes with readings, but in an enclosed space like this, body heat will register." The footsteps moved away, climbing the ladder to the silo's main chamber above. For a brief moment, Jack allowed himself to hope they might remain undiscovered long enough for Alexandra to return, or better yet, for the storm to clear and her FBI colleagues to arrive. That hope was shattered by a sharp crack from outside, followed by several more in rapid succession. Gunshots, muffled by the blizzard but unmistakable. Someone had encountered resistance outside the silo, and given what they had just overheard about no witnesses, Jack could guess who was involved. Michael, tensed beside him, clearly recognizing the sounds as well. The young man's hand tightened on the crowbar he still carried, though both knew it would provide little defense against armed professionals. In the cramped confines of their hiding place, with Jack's heart condition limiting his mobility, they were utterly vulnerable if discovered. The gunfire ceased as abruptly as it had begun. Silence followed, broken only by the faint howl of the blizzard outside and the continued movement of searchers in the upper levels of the silo. Jack found himself holding his breath, straining to hear any indication of what had happened. Minutes stretched like hours as they waited. Then, without warning, the access cover above them was wrenched open, flooding their hiding place with light. Jack squinted upward, expecting to see the barrel of a weapon pointed at them. Instead, a familiar face appeared in the opening. Alexandra. Reeves, snow clinging to her hair and a fresh cut visible on her cheekbone, but very much alive. "Quickly," she hissed, extending a hand to help them out. "We have maybe 2 minutes before they realize their perimeter guard isn't responding to radio checks." As Michael helped Jack climb back into the maintenance chamber, he noticed something different about Alexandra. Her borrowed coat was now bulkier, and a second weapon was visible at her waist, presumably taken from one of the perimeter guards she had encountered. "Your medication," she said briskly, handing Jack a familiar orange prescription bottle. "And this." She passed Michael a set of keys with a prominent key fob. "Their transportation. 2 SUVs parked behind the equipment shed, engines running to keep them warm." Jack quickly swallowed one of his pills, relief flooding through him, even though he knew the medication would take time to work. "How many did you—" He left the question unfinished. "2 incapacitated, non-fatally," Alexandra replied with professional detachment. "I'm federal law enforcement, not an assassin, regardless of what they might have told you while I was gone." She checked her watch. "The storm is expected to begin clearing around 200 hours. If we can secure transportation and reach the county road, we might be able to rendezvous with my backup team once they are able to mobilize." The plan made sense, but Jack hesitated. We're talking about stealing vehicles from armed mercenaries in the middle of a blizzard, then somehow navigating to a rendezvous point while potentially being pursued, as opposed to waiting here to be found by their thermal imaging equipment and executed as witnesses. Alexandra countered. I don't like the odds either, Mr. Harmon, but we've run out of alternatives. The matter-of-fact assessment was interrupted by a crackle of radio static from a device attached to Alexandra's belt, another acquisition from the perimeter guards. A voice came through, partially obscured by interference, but clear enough to understand. All units. Thermal scan showing 3 heat signatures in the silo's lower level. Converge and secure. Repeat, converge and secure. Alexandra's expression hardened. Decision time is over. We move now or we die here. The stark choice hung in the air for only a moment before Jack nodded. Lead the way, Agent Reeves. With renewed urgency, they prepared to step back into the blizzard that had brought them together, and now represented their only hope of survival against forces determined to preserve secrets that had been buried beneath Harmon Farm for far too long. Stepping back into the blizzard was like diving into an ice bath. The brief respite in the silo had allowed their bodies to warm slightly, making the renewed assault of sub-zero wind and driving snow all the more shocking. Jack felt the cold dig into his bones as Alexandra led them along the silo's curved exterior wall, using the structure to shield them from the worst of the wind while providing cover from potential observers. His heart medication had begun to take effect, dulling the crushing pain in his chest to a more manageable discomfort. Still, each labored step through knee-deep snow demanded more exertion than his recovering heart wanted to give. Michael stayed close beside him, one hand at his father's elbow, providing subtle support without robbing him of dignity. Alexandra moved with the careful precision of her training, balancing speed with stealth as she guided them away from the silo. The stolen radio at her belt occasionally crackled with transmissions, providing valuable intelligence on their pursuers' movements. Primary. Team entering lower level now, a voice reported through static. Stand by for confirmation. They've found our hiding place, Alexandra translated unnecessarily, her breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. We have minutes at most before they realize we've left and organize a search pattern. The equipment shed where she had located the Intruders' vehicles was roughly 200 yards from the silo, a distance that would be trivial on a clear day, but represented a significant challenge under current conditions. Jack forced himself to focus on each step, drawing on decades of stubborn perseverance that had seen him through countless farm crises. Visibility remained severely limited, rarely extending beyond 20 feet in any direction. The blizzard that had initially seemed their greatest threat had become their most valuable ally, concealing their movement while hampering their pursuers. Even thermal imaging would be of limited use with snow this heavy and wind this strong. How did you manage to get past their guards? Michael asked Alexandra as they pushed forward, genuine admiration in his voice despite their dire circumstances. The storm provided cover, she replied simply. They were watching for movement from the perimeter inward, not from the house outward. I approached from their blind side and used non-lethal takedown techniques. FBI training emphasizes incapacitation over elimination whenever possible. Jack noted her deliberate emphasis on non-lethal and incapacitation, a clear contrast to their pursuers' casual discussion of no witnesses. Whatever moral complexity might exist in this situation, the lines between right and wrong seemed increasingly clear. As they approached the equipment shed, a dark shape gradually emerged from the swirling white. The metal building, used primarily for storing the farm's tractors and implements, was one of the newer structures on the property, built when Jack's operation had been more profitable. Now it sheltered 2 black SUVs, identical to the one Alexandra had been driving when she first encountered the storm. Stay low and move to the side door, Alexandra instructed, indicating a smaller entrance on the building's southern wall. "I'll verify the vehicles are still viable for transport." Before they could follow her direction, the radio at her belt crackled again, this time with unmistakable urgency. "All units! Targets have evacuated the silo. Tracks indicate movement toward the southeast quadrant. Deploy thermal and establish search pattern Alpha. Shoot on sight. Repeat, shoot on sight." The order eliminated any remaining doubt about their pursuers' intentions. Jack exchanged a grim look with Michael as Alexandra accelerated their pace, abandoning stealth for speed. "Change of plan," she announced, steering them directly toward the main doors of the equipment shed. "No time for subtlety." The large sliding doors were partially open, allowing them to slip inside without fully exposing themselves. The interior was dark, but considerably warmer than outside, the idling engines of two black SUVs maintaining a temperature just above freezing. The vehicle's headlights were off, but their running lights provided enough illumination to navigate the space. Jack recognized two inert forms secured with plastic zip ties in the corner, the guards Alexandra had incapacitated. They were breathing but unconscious, their weapons and communications equipment removed. The thoroughness of Alexandra's work reminded Jack that despite her professional demeanor, he was witnessing a highly trained federal agent operating in crisis conditions. "Michael, you take the lead vehicle," Alexandra directed, tossing him one set of keys. "Your father rides with you. I'll follow in the second SUV to provide cover if necessary." "Wouldn't it make more sense for you to lead?" Michael questioned. "You know where we're going." "County Road 27, heading east," she replied efficiently. "It's the most direct route to where my backup team will be approaching from. But more importantly, if we encounter resistance, I need to be in the trailing position to engage while you get your father to safety." The strategic thinking was sound, though Jack disliked being treated as a liability requiring protection. For most of his life, he had been the protector, the one who solved problems and ensured others' safety. Age and illness had imposed limitations he resented but couldn't deny. "What about the farm?" he asked suddenly, the question surprising even himself. "All our equipment, the livestock—" "Dad, we have to leave it," Michael cut in gently. "Just for now. Once Agent Reeves's team arrives, we can—" A sharp crack from outside interrupted him. Not gunfire this time, but the distinctive sound of the silo's exterior hatch being forced fully open. Their pursuers had already tracked them to the equipment shed. "Go, now!" Alexandra commanded, her service weapon drawn as she positioned herself between them and the potential threat. Michael reacted instantly, helping Jack into the passenger seat of the lead SUV before sliding behind the wheel. The vehicle was already running, its heater blasting warm air that felt almost painful against Jack's cold, numbed skin. Through the windshield, he watched Alexandra back toward the second vehicle, her attention fixed on the partially open door, through which they had entered moments earlier. The shed's main doors were obstructed by snowdrifts, requiring Michael to force them wider before they could exit. The scraping sound seemed thunderous in the tense silence, surely alerting anyone nearby to their presence. Jack held his breath, expecting gunfire at any moment. Instead, a different sound cut through the howling wind, the mechanical whine of the shed's side door being rolled open. A beam of light swept across the interior, followed immediately by a male voice shouting, "Contact! Vehicles mobilizing!" Alexandra fired two precise shots that shattered the light source, plunging that section of the shed back into darkness. She dived into the second SUV as Michael finally created enough clearance to maneuver their vehicle through the main doors. "Go! I'll cover!" Alexandra's voice came through clearly despite the chaos, the calm authority in her tone somehow more reassuring than any emotional urgency would have been. Michael accelerated, the SUV's four-wheel drive struggling momentarily, before gaining traction in the deep snow. They burst from the equipment shed into the full fury of the blizzard, visibility instantly reduced to the few yards illuminated by their headlights. Behind them, muzzle flashes briefly lit the darkness. As shots were fired toward their retreating vehicles, the SUV's navigation system came to life as Michael activated it, displaying their position on the Harmon property and the fastest route to County Road 27. Jack watched the small blue dot that represented them moving steadily across the digital representation of his land that had been in his family for generations, land that now seemed to be slipping away from them in more ways than one. "They're following," Michael reported tensely, eyes flicking between the windshield and the rear-view mirror where headlights had appeared, cutting through the snow perhaps 100 yards behind them. Both Agent Reeves and at least one of their vehicles. Jack twisted in his seat to look back, wincing at the pain the movement caused in his chest. He could make out the distinctive pattern of the government-issue SUV's headlights, with another set of lights close behind it. Too close. Alexandra was being pursued, and the distance was closing. A flash of light erupted from the trailing vehicle, followed by the crack of gunfire carried faintly through the storm. Someone was shooting at Alexandra's SUV from the pursuing vehicle. "We have to help her," Jack insisted, instinct overriding caution. Michael nodded grimly, already slowing their vehicle. "What do you suggest? We're not armed, and I'm not exactly trained for vehicular combat." Before Jack could respond, Alexandra's voice came through the SUV's communication system, apparently linked to both vehicles. "Maintain course to extraction. Point," she ordered, her voice steady despite the obvious danger she faced. "Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage." As if to emphasize her point, more gunfire flashed from the pursuing vehicle. This time, Alexandra's SUV swerved sharply, executing a maneuver that momentarily confused her pursuer. Jack watched in astonishment as she deliberately steered into a deep snowdrift at high speed, using it to spin her vehicle 180 degrees while maintaining forward momentum. The result was that she was now facing her pursuer. Both vehicles still, in motion, but on a collision course. For a breathless moment, Jack thought she intended to ram them head-on. Instead, at the last possible second, Alexandra's SUV veered sharply to the side, forcing the pursuing vehicle to swerve to avoid impact. The pursuer's evasive action sent them into an uncontrolled slide on the snow-covered ground. Their vehicle spun completely around before coming to rest at an awkward angle, temporarily disabled but not destroyed. Alexandra quickly righted her course, accelerating to catch up with Michael and Jack. Her voice came through the communication system again, now with a hint of urgent satisfaction. "That buys us maybe 2 minutes. Push to maximum safe speed for conditions. We need distance now." Michael complied, pressing the accelerator as much as he dared given the treacherous conditions. The SUV's powerful engine and four-wheel drive system performed admirably, maintaining traction where most vehicles would have faltered. Jack found himself grateful for the Intruders' choice of transportation. Whatever their other failings, they had come prepared for the environment. The navigation system indicated they were approaching the property boundary that separated Harmon Farm from the county road beyond. Jack felt a strange pang as they crossed this threshold. In 68 years, he had never fled his land under threat. Even during the worst crises, he had stayed and faced whatever challenges arose. This forced departure felt like surrender, though his rational mind understood the necessity. County Road 27 was barely distinguishable from the surrounding landscape, snow having erased the usual visual markers of pavement edges and center lines. Only the relative flatness of the road surface and the occasional reflective post indicated they had reached their destination. "East," Alexandra directed as they paused at the junction. "My team will be approaching from that direction once the storm clears enough for helicopter deployment." Michael turned the SUV as instructed. the wheels briefly losing traction before grabbing hold of the packed snow beneath. Alexandra's vehicle followed close behind, her headlights providing additional illumination that helped identify the road's path through the white expanse. For several minutes, they traveled in tense silence. The only sounds, the howling wind outside and the steady hum of the engine. The navigation system showed them making slow but consistent progress eastward, away from Harmon Farm and toward the potential safety of FBI reinforcements. "How long until your backup could reasonably reach us?" Jack asked, breaking the silence. Alexandra's voice came through the communication system, slightly distorted by static. "The storm is forecast to begin clearing around 200 hours. Assuming optimal conditions after that point, helicopter deployment could reach us by 0330 or 0400 at the earliest." Jack checked the SUV's clock. 11:47 p.m. More than 4 hours until potential rescue, assuming the weather cooperated. 4 hours of running and hiding from pursuers who knew the area and had demonstrated both resources and determination. "We can't just drive in a straight line for 4 hours, Michael observed, vocalizing Jack's own concern. "They'll catch up eventually, especially if they call in additional personnel." "Agreed," Alexandra replied. "We need a defensible position to wait out the storm, somewhere not obvious but accessible by road." Jack considered their options, mentally reviewing the landscape along County Road 27. Most properties in this area were farmland similar to his own, with scattered homesteads that would provide little security against determined pursuers. But there was one exception, the old Kingsley place, he suggested, about 8 miles east. It was a farm originally, but the county seized it for back taxes about 15 years ago. They converted the main barn into a road maintenance facility, salt storage, snowplows, that sort of thing. Should be unoccupied during the storm but secure. "Would it have communication equipment?" Alexandra asked, professional interest evident in her tone. "Basic radio for county operations," Jack confirmed. "Maybe a landline if it hasn't been disconnected. At minimum, it's concrete construction with limited access points and good visibility of the surrounding area." The suggestion met with Alexandra's approval, and they adjusted their course slightly to align with Jack's directions. The county facility wouldn't appear on standard navigation systems as anything other than an unmarked building, potentially giving them an advantage if their pursuers relied on GPS rather than local knowledge. As they continued eastward, the storm showed the first subtle signs of diminishing intensity. Snow still fell heavily, but the wind had begun to slacken slightly, allowing visibility to extend beyond the immediate reach of their headlights. Jack took this as a positive omen, though he knew from decades of experience that winter storms in this region were unpredictable and often deceptive in their patterns. The medication had fully taken effect now, reducing his cardiac symptoms to a manageable background discomfort. The immediate crisis had passed, though Jack harbored no illusions about his condition. Without proper medical attention soon, the strain of their flight could trigger a more serious episode. He kept this concern to himself, unwilling to add to Michael's already considerable burden. "How did you end up working financial crimes for the FBI?" Jack asked Alexandra through the communication system, partly from genuine curiosity, and partly to distract himself from physical discomfort. Her response came after a brief pause, as though the personal question had surprised her. "I was an accountant before joining the Bureau," she explained, "specialized in forensic accounting for a major firm in Chicago. When a case I was working intersected with an FBI investigation, they were impressed enough to suggest I consider applying. That was 11 years ago. And now you're chasing shadowy conspiracies through blizzards in rural Minnesota," Michael observed, with a hint of wry humor despite their situation. "Career advancement?" A small chuckle came through the speaker. Something like that. The Langford case has been my focus for nearly 3 years. What started as routine financial anomalies in property transactions led to connections with state officials, environmental regulation manipulation, and eventually the rare earth element angle. It's the kind of case that defines a career, assuming one survives it. The casual reference to survival sent a chill through Jack that had nothing to do with the weather. The stakes of their situation remained life and death, a reality that momentary banter couldn't diminish. "I see lights ahead," Michael reported suddenly, slowing their vehicle. "Stationary, just off the road to the right." Jack leaned forward, straining to see through the windshield. Approximately half a mile ahead, faint lights glowed through the falling snow, too steady for vehicle headlights, suggesting a structure of some kind. "That's not the Kingsley place," he said with certainty. "We're still at least 6 miles out. Could be the Peterson farmhouse, though I thought they'd gone south for the winter." Alexandra's voice cut through with immediate authority. "Approach with caution. Kill your headlights at 300 yards and coast past at minimal speed. Could be nothing, could be an ambush point." Michael complied, reducing their speed while preparing to switch off the headlights on her command. Jack felt tension building, again in his chest. Not cardiac this time, but the primal instinct that had helped humans survive as prey long before they became predators. Something about those lights felt wrong in a way he couldn't articulate. 300 yards, Alexandra announced. "Lights off now." The sudden darkness was disorienting, their world instantly reduced to shadowy shapes barely visible in the ambient. Light reflected by the snow. Michael kept the vehicle moving forward at a crawl, navigating more by feel than sight as they approached the mysterious lights. As they drew closer, the source became clear, a roadblock consisting of 2 vehicles. Positioned across County Road 27, their emergency lights flashing in patterns that suggested official authority. Men in what appeared to be uniformed parkers moved around the vehicles, ostensibly checking something on the road surface. "County Sheriff," Michael whispered, as though they might be overheard from outside the vehicle. "Should we approach?" "They could help us." "No," Alexandra and Jack replied simultaneously, their instincts aligned. "Sheriff Dayton drives a white Suburban with county markings," Jack explained. "Those are unmarked black vehicles, just like the ones at our farm. And the county wouldn't have deputies out checking road conditions in the middle of a blizzard. They'd be responding to emergencies only." "It's a trap," Alexandra confirmed. "They've set up a choke point on the assumption we'd take the most direct route to potential backup. We need an alternate path, immediately." Jack studied what little he could see of their surroundings, drawing on mental maps formed through decades of traveling these roads in all conditions. "There's a service road about quarter-mile back, used to connect to the rail line before they abandoned it in the 90s. It's unplowed and rough, but it runs parallel to the county road for about 3 miles before rejoining it east of where they're set up." "Can these vehicles handle it?" Alexandra asked. "If anything can," Michael replied. "They're built for this kind of terrain." With careful precision, Michael executed a 3-point turn on the narrow county road, dousing even their taillights to avoid detection. Moving solely by memory and the faint outline of snow-covered ditches on either side, he backtracked until Jack indicated they had reached the turnoff. The service road was little more than a farmer's access path, unmarked and untraveled for months, if not years. Snow had drifted across it in waves, creating an undulating surface that challenged even the SUV's capable suspension system. They moved slowly, every bump and dip transmitted through the chassis in a way that aggravated Jack's tender chest. "They'll realize we've bypassed them eventually," Alexandra noted through the communication system, her vehicle following closely in their tracks. "But it buys us time and demonstrates that we have local knowledge they may not have anticipated." Jack nodded, grimly, though she couldn't see the gesture. Local knowledge. The accumulated wisdom of generations spent learning every contour and characteristic of the land might be their only substantial advantage against pursuers with superior numbers, equipment, and training. As they bounced along the forgotten service road, Jack found himself reflecting on the strange convergence of circumstances that had brought them to this point. His simple act of rescue during a blizzard had unexpectedly connected him to a conspiracy that had apparently been unfolding beneath his feet for years. The land that had been slowly slipping away from him through financial pressure now revealed itself as far more valuable than he had ever imagined, and far more dangerous. The navigation system showed them making a wide arc around the roadblock, gradually working their way back toward County Road 27, beyond the point where it had been obstructed. If they could reach the Kingsley place undetected, they might have a defensible position to await rescue once the storm cleared enough for Alexandra's backup to arrive. It was a tenuous plan riddled with potential failure points, but as Jack had learned through decades of farming in an unpredictable climate, sometimes the only viable strategy was to adapt, persevere, and trust that preparation would meet opportunity somewhere along the way. As they continued their cautious progress through the storm, Jack found himself oddly grateful despite their perilous circumstances. His heart condition had stabilized with medication. His son was demonstrating the capability and clear thinking Jack had always hoped he possessed. And in Alexandra Reeves, they had found an ally whose skills might just be sufficient to see them through this crisis alive. For a man who had faced the imminent loss of everything just hours earlier, it represented a strange sort of progress, trading one desperate situation for another, but with renewed purpose and unexpected allies. Whatever came next, Jack Harmon was determined to face it with the same stubborn resilience that had defined his approach to life for nearly 7 decades on his family's land. The old Kingsley place appeared through the diminishing snowfall like a fortress emerging from fog. What had once been a traditional Minnesota dairy farm had been transformed by county renovations into a utilitarian maintenance facility. All practical function with little concern for aesthetics. The main barn, now converted to house road equipment, dominated the property with its reinforced concrete walls and metal roof. Adjacent storage buildings formed a rough semicircle around a central yard, creating a compound that felt both secure and isolated. Jack directed Michael to approach from the eastern access road, a less obvious entry point than the main drive. Alexandra followed in the second SUV, maintaining communication through the vehicle's linked systems. The storm had continued its gradual retreat, visibility improving with each passing hour. What had initially seemed a blessing now raised new concerns. Clearer conditions would make their position easier to spot for pursuers. Circle once before entering, Alexandra instructed. Look for signs of recent activity or surveillance equipment. Michael complied, making a wide loop around the facility's perimeter. Nothing suggested the place had been visited since the last snowfall several days earlier. No tracks disturbed the pristine drifts surrounding the buildings, and no lights shone from within the compound. Looks clear, Michael reported, bringing their vehicle to a stop near a small side entrance to the main building. What's our approach? I'll secure the interior, Alexandra replied, her training evident in the methodical response. You assist your father inside once I confirm it's safe. We'll establish defensive positions and activate communication equipment if available. Jack wanted to protest being treated as a liability requiring special handling, but his physical condition made such objections hollow. The cardiac medication had stabilized his immediate symptoms, but exhaustion and stress were taking their toll. Each breath in the frigid air sent sharp reminders through his chest that his heart wasn't what it once was. Alexandra exited her vehicle smoothly, service weapon drawn but held low as she approached the side entrance. The door was secured with A standard county padlock, substantial but not impenetrable. She examined it briefly before retrieving a small toolkit from her pocket. Practical skills they teach at Quantico? Michael observed through their open window as she efficiently manipulated the lock mechanism. Actually, misspent youth in Chicago before I found accounting, she replied with unexpected candor, not looking up from her work. Reformed juvenile. Delinquent makes good. The Bureau doesn't need to know everything about your background. The lock yielded with a satisfying click, and Alexandra disappeared inside the building after signaling them to wait. Jack and Michael sat in tense silence, watching the darkness beyond the vehicle's windows for any sign of pursuit. The navigation system's clock read 1:38 a.m., still hours before potential reinforcements could arrive, assuming the weather continued. To improve, 5 minutes later, Alexandra reappeared in the doorway, holstering her weapon. Clear, power's on, basic heat functioning. There's even satellite communication equipment for emergency coordination. With Michael's assistance, Jack made his way into the facility. The interior was Spartan, but practical. A large central area housed several snowplows and salt trucks, while offices and storage rooms lined the perimeter. Alexandra had activated minimal lighting, enough to navigate without making the building a beacon in the night. County Emergency Operations Center, she explained, leading them to a small room equipped with radio equipment, computers, and a large map of the region marked with grid coordinates. Basic but functional. I've already transmitted our coordinates and situation assessment to my field office using the satellite uplink. Jack sank gratefully into a chair at the communications desk, his stamina finally reaching its limit. The room was warming gradually as the building's heating system compensated for months of disuse. He removed his outer layers, noting with dismay the sweat that had soaked his inner clothing despite the cold. Another potential cardiac warning sign Michael had apparently noticed as well. "You need to rest," he said firmly, his tone brooking no argument. "Agent Reeves and I can handle security. There's a cot in the corner, probably for operators during extended storm response." Jack wanted to protest, but found he lacked the energy. Years of stubborn self-reliance warred briefly with physical reality before surrendering to necessity. He allowed Michael to help him to the cot, settling onto it with a sigh that contained equal parts relief and frustration. "What's our defensive posture?" he asked Alexandra, unwilling to be completely sidelined despite his condition. She had been examining the facility's floor plan posted on the wall, marking notes on a small notepad. "Single-point entry defense isn't viable with our numbers. We'll create a monitored perimeter using the security cameras, establish fallback positions, and prepare contingencies." Her professional assessment continued, outlining fields of fire and potential vulnerabilities. But Jack found himself struggling to focus as exhaustion pulled at his consciousness. The medication, stress, and physical exertion combined to create an overwhelming fatigue, unlike anything he had experienced since his initial heart attack. "Rest," Michael urged, seeing his father struggle to stay engaged. "We've got this covered." Jack reluctantly yielded, allowing his eyes to close while Alexandra and Michael continued their security preparations. Their voices faded as he drifted into much-needed sleep, his last conscious thought a strange mixture of concern and pride, concern for their dangerous circumstances, pride in his son's capability under pressure. He awoke disoriented, uncertain how much time had passed. The room remained dimly lit, but something had changed. An alertness in the air, a tension that penetrated even his exhausted state. Jack sat up carefully, noting with relief that his chest pain had subsided to a dull ache rather than the sharp distress of earlier. Michael stood by the communications desk, speaking in low tones with Alexandra as they studied something on one of the monitors. Neither had noticed Jack's return to consciousness. "How long was I out?" he asked, his voice rough with sleep, Both turned, Michael's expression revealing surprise and something else, concern, perhaps, or anticipation. "About 2 hours," Alexandra replied, glancing at her watch. "Storm's nearly past, visibility excellent now with just light snowfall." "Your FBI backup?" Jack asked hopefully. "En route. ETA approximately 40 minutes. She hesitated before adding, "But we have another development." Jack stood, moving to join them at the monitor. The screen displayed a thermal imaging feed from one of the facility's security cameras, showing 3 vehicles approaching along County Road 27 from the west, the direction of Harmon Farm. "They found us," Michael stated grimly. "Not necessarily," Alexandra countered. "They're conducting a systematic search pattern along likely routes. We haven't observed any behavior indicating they know our specific location. Yet." Jack studied the approaching vehicles, noting their careful, measured progress. "How long until they reach us?" "At their current speed, 15 minutes, maybe less." Alexandra's tone remained measured, professional. "We have options. The satellite communication is secure. They can't track it. My team is inbound with air support. If we maintain a low profile, they might pass by without investigating this facility." It was the rational approach, minimizing risk while maximizing their chance of surviving until reinforcements arrived. Jack understood the logic, but found himself struggling with the implications. Hiding, waiting, hoping not to be discovered. It ran counter to his nature, particularly when the threat was approaching his son. "And if they don't pass by?" he asked. "If they conduct a thorough search of every possible location, including this one?" Alexandra met his gaze directly. "Then we defend our position as long as necessary. I have tactical training and adequate ammunition. This building has multiple fallback points and limited approaches. We can hold out until backup arrives." Michael had been unusually quiet during this exchange. His attention focused on a different monitor, displaying a topographical map of the surrounding area. Now he looked up, determination evident in his expression. "There's another option," he said. We split up. Both Jack and Alexandra turned to him with varying degrees of surprise and concern. "I can take one vehicle and create a diversion," Michael continued, pointing to a route on the map. "Draw them away from here, giving you both a better chance of remaining undetected until help arrives." "Absolutely not," Jack responded immediately, paternal instinct overriding tactical considerations. "We stay together." "It makes strategic sense," Michael argued. "Agent Reeves needs to protect the Langford evidence, and you're in no condition for any kind of mobile evasion. I'm the logical choice to draw them off." Alexandra had not immediately rejected the proposal, her tactical mind evidently considering its merits despite the risks. "It's unnecessarily dangerous," she finally said, "but not entirely without merit if properly executed." Jack stared at them both, disbelieving. "We're talking about sending my son, alone, to deliberately attract the attention of armed professionals who have already demonstrated willingness to kill." "Dad," Michael said gently, "I'm not suggesting a heroic last stand, just a diversion. Make them chase shadows while you two remain secure. I know these roads, even in winter conditions, they don't." The room fell silent as the implications hung in the air. Jack felt torn between tactical logic and parental instinct, between acknowledging his son as a capable adult and protecting him as he had done since birth. Before he could formulate a response, Alexandra's satellite phone chirped with an incoming transmission. "Reeves," she answered crisply, stepping slightly away from them for privacy. Her expression shifted as she listened. Professional composure. Momentarily surprised by whatever information she was receiving. "Confirm that intelligence?" "Yes." "Understood. We'll maintain position and await extraction." She ended the call, turning back to them with renewed urgency. "Situation has evolved. My team intercepted communications indicating their reinforcements are also inbound. Private contractors with helicopter support, ETA similar to our backup. This just became a race. The tactical dynamics had shifted dramatically. What had been a waiting game now transformed into a countdown. Whichever side received air support first would likely determine the outcome. My diversion plan makes even more sense now, Michael insisted. If I can delay their ground forces, it might prevent them from establishing a landing zone for their air support. Alexandra considered this, tactical calculations visible in her expression. A properly executed diversion could buy critical time, she acknowledged reluctantly, but it would require precise timing and immediate extraction once our support arrives. Jack watched this discussion with growing alarm, seeing his son volunteer for a dangerous mission with the calm rationality that reminded him painfully of Clara. His late wife had possessed the same clear-eyed courage, the same willingness to accept necessary risks for proper cause. Michael had inherited more than just her eyes and smile. "I can't let you do this," Jack said. Though with less conviction than before, Michael's response was gentle but firm. "Dad, for my entire life, I've watched you make hard choices to protect our family and our land. Now it's my turn." He turned to Alexandra. What exactly would maximize the effectiveness of this diversion? She hesitated only briefly before professional training took over. Draw them at least 3 miles from this position. Maintain constant movement. If they focus on pursuit, they can't establish a secure LZ for their air support. Avoid direct engagement. The goal is distraction, not confrontation. As they discussed tactical details, Jack found himself experiencing a profound shift in perspective. For decades, he had defined himself as the protector, the decision-maker, the one who shouldered burdens so others wouldn't have to. Now, watching his son calmly prepare to risk himself, Jack recognized that his role had changed without his noticing. Michael wasn't just his child anymore. He was a man making his own choices based on values Jack had spent a lifetime demonstrating. "If you're doing this," Jack finally said, interrupting their planning, "you need to understand something important." He waited until he had both their attention. "The county graded the East Service Road last summer. It's not on any maps yet, but it connects through the old Miller property all the way to Highway 14. If you need an escape route they won't know about, that's your best option." The information, practical, specific, drawing on local knowledge no outsider could possess, was Jack's way of accepting the inevitable while still contributing to his son's safety. Michael recognized it for what it was, nodding with both gratitude and understanding. "Take this," Alexandra added, removing a small device from her pocket and handing it to Michael. "Emergency transponder. Keep it deactivated until you absolutely need extraction. My team will monitor for the signal." The preparations moved quickly after that. Michael gathered essential supplies while Alexandra coordinated with her inbound team, adjusting their approach to account for the new plan. Jack focused on providing detailed terrain information that might give his son even the slightest advantage. Every drainage culvert, every windbreak, every feature that might offer momentary cover or tactical opportunity. As Michael prepared to depart, Jack pulled him into a fierce embrace that conveyed everything words couldn't adequately express. No dramatic speeches, no emotional declarations, just the unspoken understanding between them that they each now carried aspects of the other's strength. 30 minutes maximum, Alexandra instructed as Michael headed for the door. "Then return, regardless of circumstances. Our window for extraction will be narrow and precise." Michael acknowledged the instruction with a determined nod before disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness. Through the window, Jack watched his son's vehicle navigate carefully away from the facility, lights extinguished to avoid immediate detection. Pride and fear warred within him, neither gaining clear advantage. "He'll be fine," Alexandra said quietly, joining Jack at the window. "Your son has remarkable capabilities under pressure, like his father." The compliment, delivered with professional assessment rather than empty reassurance, offered genuine comfort. Jack had observed Alexandra's tactical judgment firsthand. If she believed in Michael's ability to execute this mission, there was solid basis for that confidence. They returned to the monitoring station, watching the thermal feeds as Michael's vehicle made its way across the landscape. The approaching convoy had reached a position approximately 1 mile from their location, still moving in a search pattern that suggested they hadn't identified the county facility as a target. "Look there," Alexandra pointed, as Michael's vehicle suddenly accelerated along a perpendicular route that would intersect the convoy's path. "He's making his move." Jack held his breath as the thermal signatures converged. Michael's vehicle crossed the convoy's route perhaps half a mile ahead of them, clearly visible before disappearing behind a stand of trees. The effect was immediate. All 3 pursuing vehicles changed course, accelerating toward the point where Michael had been spotted. "Perfect execution," Alexandra commented, professional appreciation evident in her tone. "He's drawn them away from our position and toward empty terrain with multiple escape routes." The chase unfolded on their monitors like a silent film, thermal signatures moving across the landscape in a deadly game of cat and mouse. Michael maintained enough distance to prevent direct engagement while keeping his pursuers fully committed to the chase. Each time they adjusted their approach to try cutting him off, he would shift to an unexpected direction that utilized terrain features invisible in the darkness. "He's using the contours of the land," Jack explained, recognizing patterns in his son's movement. "Those dips and rises aren't visible to someone who doesn't know they're there, especially at night. But if you've worked that ground your whole life—" "Local knowledge trumping technology," Alexandra finished, nodding with understanding. "An advantage no amount of equipment can overcome." For 23 tense minutes, they watched Michael lead his pursuers on an increasingly frustrated chase, drawing them nearly 5 miles from the county facility. Jack's heart swelled with pride, even as anxiety maintained its grip. His son was demonstrating not just courage, but intelligence and skill, using every advantage while minimizing unnecessary risks. Alexandra's satellite phone chirped again. "Reeves," she answered, listening intently before the tension in her shoulders visibly released. "Understood. Landing zone coordinates transmitted. We're ready for extraction." She turned to Jack with the first genuine smile he'd seen since meeting her in the blizzard. "Our team has established air superiority. Their helicopter turned back when our assets were detected. Ground extraction team is 3 minutes from our position." Relief flooded through Jack, though tempered by concern for Michael still leading. Pursuers through the pre-dawn landscape. "What about my son?" "Transponder activated 2 minutes ago," Alexandra replied, checking her equipment. "Extraction team is diverting to his position after securing us. His distraction worked perfectly. Their forces are scattered and disorganized now." Before Jack could respond, a new sound penetrated the building. The distinctive whoomp-whoomp of helicopter rotors approaching rapidly. Alexandra moved to the window, verifying the aircraft's markings before nodding with satisfaction. "FBI tactical team," she confirmed. "We're secure." Events accelerated after that. The helicopter landed in the open area behind the county facility, disgorging 6 agents in tactical gear who secured the building perimeter with practiced efficiency. Alexandra transferred the Langford evidence to her team leader, while medics attended to Jack, checking his cardiac status and administering supplemental medication. "Your son's transponder shows him stationary at a position approximately 4 miles southeast," one of the tactical team reported to Alexandra. "Extraction helicopter is en route, ETA 3 minutes." Jack insisted on waiting outside despite the cold, watching the eastern horizon where the first hint of dawn was beginning to lighten the sky. The storm had fully passed, leaving behind a landscape transformed by snow and bathed in the ethereal blue light that precedes sunrise. After a night of darkness and danger, the approaching day felt symbolic in ways he couldn't fully articulate. Alexandra joined him, now wearing an FBI windbreaker over her borrowed clothes. "Second helicopter reports successful extraction," she informed him quietly. "Your son is secure and uninjured. They're bringing him here now." The weight that lifted from Jack's shoulders at this news nearly brought him to his knees. He hadn't realized how completely his concern for Michael had occupied his consciousness until the fear was removed. Alexandra seemed to understand, offering a steadying hand that he accepted without embarrassment. "What happens now?" he asked as they waited. "For the second helicopter's arrival, officially or practically," she replied with a hint of wry humor. "Both. Officially, you and your son are witnesses in a federal investigation into corruption, financial crimes, and conspiracy. You'll need to provide statements, possibly testify if cases go to trial." She paused, considering him thoughtfully. "Practically, your farm sits on a strategic resource that remains relevant regardless of criminal prosecutions. That reality won't change." Jack understood the implication. The rare earth elements beneath his struggling farm would continue to attract attention, legitimate or otherwise. The immediate threat might be neutralized, but the underlying cause remained. "What would you do?" he asked. "If it were your family?" "Land?" Alexandra considered the question with evident care. "I'd recognize that sometimes value attracts predators, whether that value is financial, strategic, or personal. The question isn't whether they'll come, it's how prepared you are when they do." The conversation paused as the distinctive sound of the second helicopter approached from the east. Jack watched it appear over the tree line, sunlight now gleaming on its dark fuselage as it descended toward them. Through the side window, he could make out Michael's figure, and something tight in his chest finally released completely. As the helicopter landed and his son emerged, Jack found himself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had begun. With a simple act of rescue during a blizzard, what had started as one crisis, the imminent loss of his family farm, had transformed into something far more complex, but also, paradoxically, filled with new possibility. "You know," Alexandra said, watching the reunion between father and son with professional detachment tempered by genuine empathy, "the FBI has specialized units that work with private landowners on security for strategic resources, arrangements that benefit both national interests and the property owners. It's not standard procedure, but given the circumstances," Jack understood the offer beneath her carefully neutral phrasing. A potential path forward that might preserve the Harmon legacy while acknowledging the new reality they had discovered. Not charity, but partnership based on mutual benefit. "Might be worth discussing," he allowed, watching Michael approach through the crisp morning air. "After things settle a bit." Settle. The sun crested the horizon fully as Michael reached them, illuminating the snow-covered landscape with brilliant light that transformed overnight dangers into morning beauty. Jack embraced his son, the simple physical confirmation of his safety, more powerful than any words could express. As they stood together, watching the sunrise, Jack reflected on how completely their world had changed in less than 24 hours. The farm that had been slipping away through financial pressure now represented something entirely different. Not just land to be worked, but strategic ground to be protected. Not just a family legacy, but potentially a national asset. Most importantly, The desperate last stand of a failing farmer had transformed into something with multiple paths forward, each requiring careful consideration rather than resigned acceptance of inevitable loss. The buried truth beneath their struggling farm had been revealed, not through their own efforts, but through a chance encounter with a stranger during a blizzard. "Ready to head home, Dad?" Michael asked, the simple question containing layers of meaning after all they had experienced. Jack nodded, looking toward the west where their farm lay waiting. "Home," he agreed. "We've got some new planning to do." As the FBI team prepared for departure, Jack found himself considering Alexandra's words about value attracting predators. The rare earth elements beneath their land represented both opportunity and danger, a resource to be managed rather than simply possessed. Much like the farm itself, which had never been merely property to the Harmon family, but a responsibility passed through generations. The morning sun continued rising over a landscape, transformed by snow and revelation, illuminating possibilities that had been hidden in darkness just hours earlier. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them with clearer understanding of both what lay beneath their feet and what stood beside them. The strength of family, the value of local knowledge, and the unexpected allies that sometimes appear, precisely when needed most. As they prepared to return to Harmon Farm, not as defeat but as reclamation, Jack reflected that sometimes the greatest discoveries come not from desperate searching, but from simple acts of humanity during life's most challenging storms. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.